Hey guys, John here, and welcome back to the Ultimate Stepic tutorial course. In this second video, we're going to take a quick tour of the different sections of Stepic, and then finally we're going to turn our focus to the controls that you find in the top bar. So if you missed the first video in this series, be sure to check the link in the video description below. So Stepic is broken down into a few different sections. The top bar up here has a lot to do with our main controls and what we're going to be covering in this video. And aside this top bar on the left-hand side, we have the sequencer page, as this is selected right over here, which is all what we see down over here. So this page itself has to do with notes. So we have the pitch of the note, we have the octave, the duration, think of that like a gate. Then we have note velocity, note swing, divider, note repeat. All this stuff we're going to be covering in a separate video. Just want to let you know that this page here has to deal with notes. And a very important thing that we should know as well is the tooltip. So if we're ever lost inside Stepic and we're not really sure what a certain slider, a function, or a knob does, we can hover our mouse over that, and then on the bottom left-hand side of Stepic, it's going to tell us what that does. So for example, we're here in octave, we can put our mouse over this, and we look on the bottom left, and it says set the octave for this step. Or we can do this up here for these green sliders, set the pitch for this step, or maybe over here where this green 16 is right here, this knob. And it says set the individual step length for this section. Or let's say down here, we're not sure what this dice does, this gray one. And this says activate random step play order. So it's very useful in case we ever get lost. Just keep in mind there's always that tooltip there to help you out whenever you get lost. So moving on from here, the next page here on the top bar is going to be the automation page. Now this page deals with automating parameters in your synth or your sampler. So if there's something that you kind of want to automate within your sequence, you can do that. And per pattern, you have 8 different lanes, which is very, very, very cool. Next up, we have the settings page. Now, this is going to be per pattern settings. So if there's certain things on a certain pattern that you want to change only for that pattern, this is going to be the section that you want to go to. On the top left-hand side of Stepic, we see these 5 gray buttons up here. The first one being a question mark. Now, this shows the Stepic Quick Start Guide. If this is the first time that you've installed Stepic, make sure to click that question mark, navigate to the folder of Stepic wherever you have that saved on your hard drive. Inside that folder, you're going to find a Quick Start PDF file. Select that, hit OK. So from now on, anytime we need to reference that Quick Start Guide, we just click that button, and then boom, here is the Quick Start Guide. Easy as a click of a button. Next up, we have this gray button here that looks like an eye. We go ahead and select that, and that's going to show the activation and different updating options here. And then we have the gear. So this is the global settings as far as zoom, different randomization options, and just different global settings here on the right-hand side. So if you're looking for something like that, it's probably going to be found in this gear icon up here. Next up, we have the MIDI CC target settings. So this is where we store the MIDI CC maps of your synthesizer. This is particularly useful for devices that have a fixed MIDI map, and all these parameters here will be available within the automation page, which we're going to cover in a later video. So next up, we have the mapping settings here. So this page gives you access to various functions such as changing patterns with a MIDI keyboard or controller, or even triggered by notes in a piano roll. As you can see, I have some notes over here already entered here. So this can be useful for live performances or even building different arrangements in your DAW. And again, later on in the course, we're going to take a closer look at this cool feature. It's important to understand how Stepic works exactly. So Stepic itself does not generate its own sound, but rather works by receiving or creating MIDI notes or CC messages and sends those out. Your synth or sampler will then receive the output MIDI of Stepic. Thus, Stepic is actually controlling that synth or that sampler. So here in FL Studio, let's go ahead and set that up, but keep in mind that depending on the DAW that you're going to be using, this process is drastically different. So check out the user guide for your DAW and seeing how to do that via the question mark up here. Hopefully you have set that up by now. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this set up here in FL Studio. Let's click the gear icon on the top left-hand side and click the center button here. And at the very bottom, you're going to see this MIDI section. Now, the output, we want to go ahead and set that up to 1, because remember, we're sending information out from Stepic, right? And we're sending it to a synth or a sampler. So now for me, I'm going to be using Hive. So let's go ahead and open up Hive and go to the same menu, this gear icon, and then the center button. And down here on MIDI, we need to set this as the in port. And I'm going to set this to 1. Now you can set this number to something other than 1, but it does matter that they both match on both ends or this process will not work. So that's all the routing that we have to set up here in FL Studio. So one thing I do want to bring your attention to is saving presets. So you're going to eventually want to save your work inside Stepic. So it's very simple here in FL Studio. Click the drop-down triangle menu on the top left, and then go to Save Preset As, call it whatever you'd like, and hit OK, and boom, there you go. You've saved your preset. So now that we have all this set up here, let's open up our piano roll and let's play some notes and see if this works. So we're hitting notes here, as we can see, but we're not hearing any sound. So I want to point your attention over here to MIDI play. So we select this here, and under the first one here, transport mode, by default, this is called sync to host. Now what this means is that once our transport is going, our song is playing right, that's going to actually trigger Stepic to start working. So let's go ahead and try that. So there we go. We can see that once our transport's going, then that is going to be triggering Stepic to start working. However, if we want to trigger Stepic with our MIDI notes on our keyboard, we just have to go to MIDI play under transport mode and change this to note on. And once we start hitting some notes, Stepic will then start working once we start playing on our keyboard. So up here on the top of Stepic, we have root note. Now by default, this is going to be on C3, meaning that any note that we play on our keyboard is going to trigger a C note. Now you might be wondering, is it possible for Stepic to actually play the pitch of the note that we're playing? Yes, that's possible, but that's something we're going to deal with a little bit later on in the course. So this root note has a range all the way here to the left on C1, and all the way to the right on C5. So quite a healthy range here, and we can double click this to go back to the default value. And directly to the right of this root note is going to be the scale, and by default here is going to be the chromatic scale, meaning all the notes on our keyboard. So let's say, for example, we want to change this, right? We don't want to stay in the chromatic scale. Let's say we want to do something in F natural minor. So we can go to the root note, and let's change this to F, and then let's change the scale with this drop-down menu here, and we can always look at all the different scales that it comes with, but we have natural minor right over here. So let's go ahead and select that, and a few different things have changed, right? Up here on this keyboard, we can see that a couple of these notes are going to be red. Now, these red notes are going to be the notes that do not belong in the F natural minor scale. And then the other notes with this square in each one of these notes do belong in F natural minor, and we're actually using those in our pool of notes. Meaning, for example, let's say we like the scale, but there's a couple notes in the scale that we don't really want to use, so we can always deselect these and exclude those notes and not have them in our workflow, which is really nice. And you can see it's reflected down here on this keyboard as well. Also here on the left-hand side, we only have the notes that are selected here. So this keyboard isn't just something to look at, but it's also interactive that we can actually use. So definitely a cool tool there. So with a backing track, even though these are all going to be on Fs, let's take a listen and see how that sounds. Next up, we have the global step amount. So this whole time, we've been using all of the 16 steps available to us. So let's say we don't want all of these 16. Maybe we want something like 8 for everything. So this is going to be the global stuff here where we can kind of dial in how many steps we want this pattern to use. So if we just want 8, we can do that. Right? And we can even change a couple of these notes here that's going to be in this scale and see how that sounds as well. Now, let's say this kind of feels a little bit slow to me. I feel like I would want to speed this up here, and that's going to be our next thing that we're going to be looking at. So right now we're in 1/8. By default, this is going to be 1/16, but I do want to show you this kind of feeling where if we want to change this here, if this feels a little bit too slow, we can always change this here, and we have a lot of stuff to pick from. So for example, 1/16 probably is going to be right for this type of patch here. Not only that, if we click this drop-down menu here, we have our whole notes, we have dotted notes, we have triplets, and down over here, we have custom, which is really, really interesting. So we can choose our own note length. So for example, we can click here, we can go 99/1, something like that. Or alternatively, we can go from 1 to 99 and have a really crazy sound like that. And this is going to be really cool for sound designing, stuff like that. Definitely very cool. So next up, we have pattern swing. So let's go ahead and change this over to 1/16, something that kind of fits right. So now we have pattern swing. So this is going to be changing the rhythmic feel here a little bit. So we can go ahead and turn this on and maybe slow this down a little bit so we can kind of feel the rhythmic change here. So take a listen as we're listening to this track here, and I'm going to move this pattern swing and kind of notice how it changes the rhythmic feel of the sequence. Yeah, definitely a cool setting there. So yeah, that was the pattern swing. On the top right of Stepic is the pattern section. So here is where we can select our different patterns, 1 through 16. We can store, delete, and tell each pattern what to do after the pattern has completed via the next pattern here on the right-hand side. So let's see how we can store and delete different patterns. This first pattern that we did a couple changes on here, let's say we want to copy this pattern to pattern 3. We can select store, and then it's going to give us this green rectangle asking us which place do we want to store it to. So we can say 3, and then that's how fast it is. It's already done. It's copied 1 to pattern 3. Now let's say we want to delete 3, right? We can select delete the same way, and then it's going to give us this red rectangle right here saying which pattern do we want to delete. And we just select 3 again, and it's that fast, and it returns it back to a default or unused pattern. Another way we can do this is via quick copy, which is really, really cool. So let's right click number 1 here, and it's going to tell us copy pattern 1, 2, and then which pattern do we want to select. And the reason it's quick copy is because we can go 3, 4, and 7, and then hit copy. Now patterns 3, 4, and 7 are exact copies of pattern 1. All the exact same. So now that we've copied these different patterns here, let's go ahead and make some of these patterns kind of cool and different from each other. Okay, so this pattern is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and change pattern 3, and let's change this also to 1/16, and maybe do something kind of like this. Let's go to number 4 here. Let's have most of this going to be Fs with a couple of different notes here every so often, something kind of like this. So all of these are going to be down 1 octave except the different notes that we have changed here. And then for 7, let's leave this one on 1/8, kind of have it a little bit slow. Okay, so now we have some pretty cool patterns via 1, 3, 4, and 7 that are all pretty different from each other. So let's see how these patterns are going to work in conjunction with each other. So on the right here, this says next pattern. Now, by default, they're going to be on same, which means that it repeats the pattern. It plays the same one over and over, right? It stays on pattern 1. Now, what we can do is go to next. Now, this is probably going to be the most used version here. So if we go to next, it's going to skip every empty pattern and go to the next used pattern. So check this out. And since we didn't change pattern 3, it's going to stay on same. So it's going to go from 1 to 3 and then keep repeating. So let's go ahead and change these all to next here. So pattern 4 is next and pattern 7 is next. And the cool part about doing this is it's going to go from 1 to 3 to 4 to 7 and then back to 1. So we're kind of creating an endless loop of these patterns here. So let's start on 1 and see how this works in real time. Definitely very cool. The next version to change patterns is going to be random. So if we select random for all of these patterns here, so random, 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 and random, it's going to obviously pick a random pattern to choose to. And now kind of think of this like an arpeggiator where the notes are going to be the patterns in this case, and it's just going to basically pick a random pattern. So it's a cool way to add a lot of variation to your patterns. So next up, the way we can change patterns is via the exact pattern number. So if we want pattern 1 to go exactly to pattern 4, we can select pattern 4 after pattern 1, and it's going to do exactly that. So moving on from here, we kind of know now how these patterns are going to be changed and moving between each other. Now we need to talk about the change mode. So we have two options. We have free run and we have retrigger. So for now, let's select these all back to same so nothing happens automatically for us, and do something kind of like this. So change mode, free run and retrigger. So free run is going to be seamlessly changing patterns when you're changing patterns. And then retrigger is going to retrigger the pattern on the pattern change. So basically, let's change a couple things here. So on pattern 1, let's go to 1/8, and then pattern 3, let's also go to 1/8. Now, both of these are going to be in free run mode. So let's kind of play these patterns and then switch manually between these patterns, and notice how seamless this switching is. It's so seamless, you wouldn't even know that I would be changing patterns. Now, if we change this to retrigger, take a listen how different these two patterns are going to be now. As you notice, it's restarting this pattern every single time we're changing this here. Whereas free run just seamlessly changes it, continues on that step. Okay, so now while we're talking about these pattern switchings, I do want to bring your attention to the hold function, which is a little bit here on the left-hand side. So let's put these back to the next pattern. So all of these back to the next. So these are going to be automatically switching for the patterns, right? Now, this hold is very, very useful. So let's say, for example, we are playing the sequence 1, 3, 4, and 7, and it's automatically switching to every next pattern once the pattern has finished. Now, let's say we don't yet want it to change the pattern and we want to do a couple edits while this is going. This is where the hold function comes in handy. So if this is off, 1 is going to go right to 3. Change these back to 1/16 here, so it's a little bit quicker here. So it goes right from 1 to 3. So let's say we're playing 1 and we want to stop it real quick while the pattern is going, and then make some changes before it automatically switches on us, so we can work uninterrupted. That's how cool that is there. You can just pause it real quick. The sequencer is going to keep going. It's going to keep doing its thing. And you can make some edits on the fly and then resume it by disengaging hold, and no one is going to know except that you just changed some cool stuff. So moving on from here, next to this hold is going to be the mute right over here on the left-hand side. So this is a global mute. Once we click this, right, it's going to be the sequencer and the automation that's going to be muted. So what we can do, we can play this now. We can see that it's going to mute Stepic's output. Now, if you just want to mute the sequencer itself, there's a little M right over here that's just going to be for the sequencer. As you can see, only the sequencer and these steps are going to be red, versus this one here where it has both of these. And next up is going to be this bar count, which is very, very cool as well. So let's say on pattern 1, we like this pattern, and are we thinking, do we want to copy this to another pattern, burn up a pattern so we can play the same thing twice? No, we don't have to do that. We can just change the bar count. So for pattern 1, let's say we want to play this 2 times and then go into pattern 3. So we just select bar count of 2, and then it's going to do exactly that. And directly to the right of this bar count is going to be the live counter, which is very useful in case you look away and you're kind of curious on what bar you're actually on of the overall bar count. So we can go all the way up to 16, which is quite a bit. So let's see what it looks like on 3, and watch this slider here, or this number count. So let's go to 1, and let's make this one 3 as well, and watch this live counter right over here work. So this is a very cool way to save patterns because you don't necessarily have to copy a pattern to another one to have double the length. This is going to be where bar count really comes in handy. The next thing we need to talk about is MIDI export, probably one of the coolest features inside Stepic. So basically, any sequence that we make in Stepic, we can export that as MIDI directly into the piano roll. So for example, let's pick an empty pattern like 5, for example, and we know we're in F minor, so let's go ahead and select F, let's go to minor, and maybe select a couple different patterns and see how this sounds with our backing track. Okay, so let's say we like something like this and we want to export that. So all we have to do, let's open up our channel rack, and then here, this button to the right of the bar count, let's click and drag that over here to Hive. And if we go to pattern mode, then we have this exported. Now, what's also cool is this follows the bar count. So for example, let's say we want 2 bars of this instead of just 1, and we drag and drop. And believe it or not, this goes all the way up to 16. So if we want 16 bars of this, we can drag and drop, and then boom, we have 16 bars of that right over there. Now, it gets really cool as well as once we start introducing some randomness to this. So for example, here on the pitch, on the right-hand side, if we click this dice here to make it green, it's going to play this in a random order, and this also follows the randomness. So let's go from 16 bars back to 2, and let's drag and drop this and see what that looks like here. So we drag and drop, and then we have this sequence here. Now we can do this again and get another random sequence. And do it again. And we can keep doing that as many times as we'd like until we find something that we really do like. Another cool way to do this is if we do per step randomness. So if we removed this green dice here and then just right click on the slider and bring everything up and down to reset everything to the root note, so we just have a sequence of 16 on the root note. Now let's say we want step 6 to be a random pitch in the scale and maybe step 11 to be a random pitch in that scale as well. Now we can drag and drop this to our piano roll, and now take a listen to this. And just to make it so it doesn't look too confusing, let's reset all of our octaves back to 0. And let's drag and drop this here. And the interesting spot about here is we're on 2 bars here, and these are the only 2 steps that are random. So it also randomizes these first 2 on the first bar, and it also randomizes these on the second bar, which is really cool. And we can drag and drop this again, and we're going to get another random sequence again. Now, a cool way to use something like this as well, we can go all the way up to 16 bars and maybe make a couple of these randoms because maybe we want to keep a lot of the root notes kind of stable, the feeling of home, but we want a couple of these notes to be random. We can do something like this and then drag and drop this into the piano roll. Now, when we open up something like this here, we have 16 bars of cool MIDI to play around with, and we can kind of scope through and kind of scan to see what parts we like, what parts we don't. And this is a cool way to get inspired to make your own stuff. So hopefully you're starting to kind of understand how cool this feature really is. So you could even load up Stepic, not even intending to use it as a sequencer, so to speak. You could load it up and say, I need 4 bars of a melody in G harmonic minor in 8th notes. Boom, it's done. You can export that as many bars as you'd like. Maybe you need 2 bars of a melody in D Lydian with a few random notes in 16th notes. Boom, you could do that as well. So hopefully you really understand the power of Stepic now. It's really, really cool, the things that you can do. So this concludes the second video. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.